Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. With this video series, I'll be analyzing and discussing Icewind Dale, Rime with Frostmaiden, one chapter at a time. Unlike my crafting videos, these videos will offer general criticisms and advice without taking a deep dive into the changes and modifications I would make for my campaign, which is still at the time of this recording forthcoming. A warning before we begin, these videos will be full of spoilers. They are for DMs only. If you are playing Rime with the Frostmaiden or plan on playing it, please do not watch these videos, but feel free to come back afterward or tell your DM to come check them out. With this video, we'll be looking at the 7th and final chapter of the campaign, The Doom of Ythryn. As I mentioned in previous videos, the last third of this campaign is structured as kind of a reverse of Tomb of Annihilation, where this time we go through a very large dungeon first, and then we do the Lost City thing. And the Lost City is a very classic trope in a lot of action-adventure movies, media, video games. Pretty much every Uncharted game always ends up with the climactic final location is this wondrous lost city. In this case, it is an ancient city buried in the glacier, part of the Netherese Empire, and should be the goal of the characters, even though you start off with the goal of, taking care of Oriel and disrupting the whole, everlasting winter thing. But if you're smart and you can tie those things together, I would suggest making the Frostmaiden Haven directly tied to Ythryn. She maybe knows it's very powerful and she's trying to keep it sealed, and that's why she's doing this whole winter thing. Or what I plan on doing in my campaign is actually make her a former wizard from Ythryn, and that she had an apotheosis and ascended into godhood, and now that it's starting to break through the glacier, she needs to shut that shit down, or else she's going to get possibly disrupted, and that's the one thing that she fears. Just some ideas. Or, you could do the whole Ythryn has crashed, and that's kind of upset some kind of magical boundary thing, and now there's things coming into the far realm. Or just the denizens of Ythryn in general have been warped and mutated, and now they're planning on spilling out into the world. So you can do altruistic in terms of you need to be heroes and go stop this, or just an excuse to go loot a lost city could always be good. And the Arcane Brotherhood would definitely help fund the players through Valin to recover artifacts here. The main thing is this thing in the middle, the Ythryn Mythalar, which is an actual very powerful magical device that is kind of a MacGuffin, but it also has an actual stat block here, and it has the power, once you're attuned to it, I believe you have to have a couple people attuned to it, it can just raise entire matter out to like a radius of about the size of this city. So that's an incredibly powerful, ancient, wondrous item to have. Anybody would be glad to have their hands on it, so that becomes a fun little race. And there's multiple factions you can use here, namely Avarice's faction of the Knight of the Black Swords, and then if you didn't defeat Oriel, hopefully you didn't, she can show up with some monsters of her own, and you can really get a nice kind of rumble here. Now, this city is not as lost as some may think. There are a number of NPCs that you need to be aware of that are chilling in here, as well as the mutant remains of the wizards, mainly as like Nothics. I think one of them is a green slod now. One of them is a ghost. Like, you have to realize it's been 2,000 years, so the denizens are all going to be either some kind of exotic creature that can survive that long, or undead, or something that's recently moved in here. The goal, once they arrive, and you should be able to get this information from the Professor Orb. That's a very important item from Valin that your players should have access to, and it knows things about the city, and hopefully it'll know, you want this Mythalar orb in the middle, but it's currently protected by a force field, and they can't make it into this central tower until you complete the, what is it called? The Rite of the Octad, I believe, which is Rite of the Arcane Octad, and you need to visit certain locations in order to gain access to it. This is very similar to how Omu is set up in Tomb of the Annihilation, where in order to gain access to the Tomb of the Nine Gods, you have to visit all the shrines and put in and get the puzzle cubes and be able to put those in the door. In this case, it's less of a puzzle and more of a riddle, where you have to learn a different line of the instructive riddle, and you gain one of those through each of those 8 towers, and each of the towers is tied to a different school of magic. And then there are additional things and areas your players will have to visit. For example, one of the things is you'll have to craft a wand from the Nether Oaks. You'll have to go to the Arboretum and be able to meet the treant there. So hopefully early on your players can learn kind of what their overall goal is, rather than just being aimlessly wandering around. If they're not using Valin or the Professor Orb, there are a couple NPCs you can use. I believe there is a doppelganger that has been in suspended animation that your players can free. I don't think they know they're a doppelganger, and it's almost kind of a just happens to be that just to make it more interesting, I guess. But they're a friendly NPC that could basically help the players out and kind of give them information about what's going on in Ythryn. That puts a lot of onus on the DM because there are a couple different NPCs that know information that may go above and beyond, the scope of the adventure. But there is a section that is Ythryn lore, which if it's not in here, then it's somewhere, that talks about kind of a table of information that the players might be able to learn from different NPCs and different pieces, like going to the library and picking up a book or something and learning some information there. So they can learn kind of the background information as well as the dynamics of the city, the fact that there's basically one dude in charge of 8 different wizards, and they form kind of a high council, and all of them have their own little school of magic and things. So early on, your players will be popping around to all these different areas. Now, in terms of Roll20, this area needs a lot of work because this is the only map that well, not the only map. We do have the actual spire map, the climactic final area that your player should reach after exploring most of the city, the central spire. We do get a map of that. It's an actual straight up regular battle map. That's awesome. However, we do not get maps of anything else, and this map is obviously not going to cut it if you're going to do, because there's a lot of battles going on in these areas. So, and even if you're not using Roll20, using some kind of pen and paper, but you still want to use maps, you're going to have to come prepared with a lot of maps for this area. Specifically, each spire needs most of the spires. Some of them, there's not really anything going on, but most of them need a map. You could probably get away with using the same map of just like a single kind of towery looking room and just replace some little details in it, because I think they're all designed to be mostly similar in terms of their design. But there's some areas you're definitely going to want to have mapped out. The Arboretum's got a Treant. The library's got an Arcanoloth. The stadium could be a really fun skill challenge where you play this game called Chain Lightning. When your players try to get the treasure and these lightning things come up, and basically they just play like a game of like rugby or football or something, but it's all using skill checks and stuff. That's a really neat idea. There is, let's see, there's a really cool thing in the well where there's like a bench park area, and there's these wizards that tried to meld their minds together, and of course it went horribly wrong, and they're just, the stat block it says uses a Hydra, but it feels like that's disappointing given what you could, this feels like an H.R. Geiger, like the Thing type creature that could emerge from this well, as kind of a shocking, like almost just surprise boss fight when your players are just chilling somewhere. I could have this thing just emerge out of there and attack them as kind of a experiment, magic experiment gone horribly wrong. So I think that's a fun idea. Just to kind of go through some of the towers themselves to get an idea of what we're up against. The Abjuration Tower includes a fight with a bunch of magans and a forge where your players can break magic items. I don't think that would necessarily come up very often, so I would almost suggest giving your players a chance to craft a magic item by giving them certain things that they can see that are like almost finished or something, and then the fact that maybe with a skill check or something that forge maybe has like one more charge left or something, and they can choose like what magic item they want to create. I think that'd be a pretty cool idea, and then you can still stick the Tomb Trapper on them. So Ythryn has some really cool creatures that are not found anywhere else. They are unique to this area because this is a 2,000-year-old city, and they have magans and Tomb Trappers, which are going to be your primary enemies that the players will probably face, aside from some interesting little unique things here and there. But the magans are kind of your shock troopers. They come in 3 different stat blocks, which is really nice. They've got a kind of generic knight stat block. There's a kind of frontline wizard stat block, and then kind of a backline like psychic specialist stat block. And if you're like me and you want to kind of scale up the adventure, so instead of having your players like beat it at like level 11, instead I'm going to try to scale things up and make this a solidly tier 3 excursion from like 12 to 14 or 15 ideally. Definitely use these magans a lot more and in greater numbers. They're only like CR 2 or 3, but they've got really good attacks and abilities, especially the spellcasters. And it would be very effective to group them together, because then you can put them in the dynamics and they all kind of complement each other in terms of, the high level AC ones can protect the mages and that kind of thing. So, and they're basically kind of android caretakers that you could definitely flavor as having gone, haywire. I like the kind of Westworldy aspect to that, of having these things be, magical androids that that in some cases maybe they're like still serving, players, and in the chain lightning game, they're still playing the game because that's what they were designed to do. But other times they've kind of gone haywire and they can attack the players, or if they're guards or things, they would certainly attack the players anyway. So definitely use that. In fact, there's a theater at one point which I really don't like the way it's written. It just seems really dumb that your players would ever actually pick up the play, want to complete it, and then curse themselves. It's just really stupid. Instead, I would go full Westworld with that thing and have it be a bunch of these magens, and have them be sitting around acting out the play, and then your players could have a chance to jump in, and maybe your bard can have fun doing a performance check or something, and then you can reward them similar to the way the music hall is written, where they can gain inspiration or do something if they just participate in the thing. But if they fail, then you can go full Westworld and have the magens actually attack them, which would be a really fun, cool moment. In the Conjuration Tower, it's got the Night Hag dimension. I'm not a big fan of that, mainly because we're just stealing too much from Tomb of Annihilation as it is, and I don't like the use of the Night Hags there, and it just feels a little, I don't know, too much on top of all the different things going on in Ythryn. I would definitely keep the living spells. In fact, I would probably use more of those in the Tower of Conjuration, the Bigby's hands, having those running around, and the what is it, the swords, and there's a demi-plane in the final boss fight. Like, those are neat ideas. Use more of those spells gone haywire, especially in the Conjuration Tower. In the Arboretum is a treant, which the players will have to meet because they'll need the wand crafted from it's the Nether Oak. And I think that is the fun NPC to use because it's really fun to roleplay a treant, especially an old one that would have very limited information because we would only know about the shit going on around him in the Arboretum. I could think it'd be a very effective role-playing NPC that doesn't give away too much information, can be a lot of fun, would know some things about Ythryn, but not a lot. And then if your players, depending on how that role-playing situation goes, could actually turn into a combat fight, or it could just turn into a social encounter. So I do like the Arboretum. I mentioned the Thing in the Well. We've got I think coming up is the Library. So the Library's got the Arcanoloth. This feels like a really bizarrely weird situation where I feel like the designers had to inject some like levity into this situation. There's an Arcanoloth that just showed up like a day ago. Which, how lost is this city? Like, the Drow found it. The Arcanoloth just teleports here and finds it. And it's got this like awakened penguin. It's got these weird things on it, and it's trying to like free itself from the Arcanoloth. It's just a weird like side little tangent that's almost just random and doesn't really amount to much. I can't say I'm a big fan of this one. I don't know. I something cool needs to happen in this library, and I'm not a fan of using the Arcanoloth there, even as a social encounter, because I feel like there's enough opportunity for social encounters here already. There's the green slot astronomer. There's, if you want to use the doppelganger that can be out of suspended animation. There's a treant. There's Veneranda, which is, I'll get to that in a second. The brain in a jar on top of the arcane or helmed horror. Like, there's plenty of NPCs you can use. I am not a fan of using the Arcanoloth. Instead, if you want to use some, maybe even have some of the drow that the players faced in the Cave of Hunger, have some of them, tentatively scouting a little bit of the city. Maybe they're in the library, like sifting through notes, trying to get more information or bring it back. I don't think you could use Avarice, the Knights of the Black Swords. You're supposed to be following the player, so unless your players veer off in one direction, then maybe they can go in another direction. Maybe they meet in the library and, something happens. I don't know. You could come up with something, but I'm not a fan of the Arcanoloth. It's just too much and too weird. Kind of similar to the Night Hags. It's just a little too much, too random. Keep things focused and, pare things down a bit to make them all more meaningful. The Divination Tower. I love how not all the towers are just fights. In fact, most of them aren't. They're just discovering some cool thing in there. And the Divination Tower has a device that your players can use. I believe they can speak something, an object or person, and they will instantly know where it is. But then they have to make a DC 20 con saving throw. So they have a chance to succeed, but it's going to be very challenging. Or they lose an eye. It's plucked out and put in the orb. And sure enough, when they go up to the orb, there's a bunch of eyes floating in there. That's hilarious. And I love that the final sentence is the only limit to how many times it can be used is how many eyeballs the party has remaining. That's the cost. And you don't know the cost till you use it. That is awesome. I love that device. Definitely have your players use that and play up the consequences of that. Go for it fully. Probably disadvantage on perception checks maybe if they lose an eyeball to it. That's awesome. Let's see, going through Wellspring of Answers. This is part of that's the Thing in the Well. As I mentioned, use something better than a Hydra. I mean, maybe you could start with a Hydra, but come on, this is supposed to be, I picture some kind of like insanely creepy, like blob creature that's just got all the bodies stuck to it and, you know, just nasty. Like, there's got to be some, maybe like it's like a gibbering mouther almost, but way more powerful. I'm thinking like a CR10 version of a gibbering mouther. I would do something like that, turn into this really creepy boss fight. There is a way for your players to actually gain information from it by just sitting on a park bench and kind of trying to link themselves to it. Maybe you can gain some information from that, but I just like turning into a big creepy boss fight because I think that's really fun. The Bazaar, they can find the Headless Iron Golem, which is, of course, they found the head in the Caves of Hunger, which is pretty funny. This just turns into a enemy. It's definitely pared down because Iron Golems are insanely powerful, so it doesn't have like its poison breath or things like that, but still, a Headless Iron Golem would be very, very strong to deal with. Let's see. Hall of Silk. Observatory has the green slot Astronomer, which is most likely going to be a social encounter, but could be a combat encounter. I just kind of learn a little bit of information from the Denizens. And again, this is an example of how some of the wizards survived, but they can't ever survive in just their original state because it's been so long. I mean, 2,000 years. So they're going to be altered or morphed in some way. Some of them perished and turned into ghosts. Others have mutated. And in fact, you'll find a lot of Nothics roaming around. That's the other kind of shock trooper you should use as a random encounter, the Nothics. And then in this case, one of them was a blue slod was, I believe, escaped from some kind of prison cell and infected the poor arch astronomer, and now she is a green slod, but apparently a fairly friendly one. She doesn't really care about what's going on. I make that a fun character. I like the idea of character. I mean, the Arcana doesn't work for me because it's just a random, like, I'm just Arcana, I showed up here, but this one at least is a former wizard here. The blue slot escaped, it was turned into a slod. Like, I think that works a lot better and reinforces the danger of Ythryn, because this was a very highly magical advanced civilization that has now crumbled and its infrastructure has collapsed, and including the infrastructure that includes all the safeguards to keep all these spells and creatures in check. For example, the Menagerie, a little disappointing because you picture a lot of cool like monsters and things that are behind the bars. Instead, it's a way for players to create their own like unique little weird pet that's got some different abilities. The abilities typically aren't that useful. I mean, I guess if you grant them a straight up kind of familiar type creature, it could be useful, but they have to give 80 hit points of blood in order to create this creature. It's a neat idea. I don't know if the reward is worth that. I mean, that's a good amount of hit points that would. But if you've got 4 or 5 people, you could distribute that, and everybody could take it. If your players are interested, I would give them something. But look at the creatures and decide if you think they're interesting or not, and how you want to deal with that. The rat with gills, a cat with antenna that grant up blind sight, like that's kind of cool. But is the creature actually a familiar? Not really. It's just kind of a little creature. Theater, as I mentioned, do the Westworld thing and make so there's a bunch of magons in there. Don't leave it up to your players to, for some reason, act out a play that they would have no business doing, and then they get cursed because of it. That's just horrible. Tower of Necromancy is destroyed. It's got a bunch of crawling claws around it, and the ghost of the Necromancer, who is lamenting the destruction of the tower. I believe it's the only tower that's actually fallen over. Definitely replace the crawling claws with a swarm of crawling claws, which I looked up, and I swore there was a stat block at some point. Maybe it was from a DM's Guild thing I reviewed, but look at swarms and apply a swarm instead of using a bunch of like 2d6 crawling, because crawling claws are shitty. They're really, really low level and bad, and your players are going to be high level at this point. Instead, transform them into several swarm stat blocks. Swarms are very powerful for their CR because they have a really good to hit chance. They have good hit points, and they have resistance to just like basic attacks, which is big. So instead, I would replace the individual crawling claws with swarms of crawling claws. Use whatever similar swarm stat block you can find, and just reflavor it a little bit. But otherwise, I think that'd be a more effective combat encounter if they want to dig through the rubble and be able to, I guess, unearth the corpse, and then that's how they also get the ritual part that they need, because again, they need to make it into all of these towers to learn the sentence that they need on the ritual that they have to perform, and it's in order, which it says, here's the 6th one, here's the 8th one, so they don't necessarily have to visit the towers in order, which I think is what makes this area really fun, and what makes investigating these kind of zones really fun in general. Is your players should early on have an idea of what they need to do. In this case, make it to the central tower, get the Mythalar, and they'll need to go to each of these towers to do it, but it's up to them entirely on the order in what they want to tackle things and where exactly they want to go and how they want to grab all that stuff. So it gives a lot of freedom to the players while still putting them in a, limiting area so the DM can prep and plan all these different things. And obviously you need to be prepared for that. The fact that your players could roll around and look at any one of these locations. The spire is, we'll get to that in a second, the actual final spire. Let's see. Evocation, gelatinous cubes is really cool as they're frozen in there. The obelisk, oh my gosh. Well, we'll talk about that when we get to the ending obelisk, the ending epilogues. The illusions, phantasmal killers is fine. I appreciate not all of these are combat related. Again, in fact, most of them are not combat related. Enchantment, let's see. Oh yeah, the mummified. That's kind of a weird one. She's in like this kind of weird psychic like stasis, but she's kind of mummified looking. And if the players for some reason, I mean, they can take off the crown and they can sell the crown. It's a great crown, but if they put it on for some reason, then it starts fucking them up. It starts siphoning out your memories and all that. You can destroy it in the forge at the abjuration one, and then it can release some information. But I'd probably just pocket that crown and keep it. Maybe make that crown into an interesting magic item that has some pros and cons to it. But if your players do try to free her from the crown state, she just crumbles and dies pretty much instantly, which I think happens. There's also one of the wizards who turned herself into a statue to avoid, being killed when the whole city crashed. And your players could use like a wish spell there and free her, but then she instantly ages up and dies. So basically, there's not really a good, easy way to restore the original members of Ythryn or Ythryn. Yeah, transmutation is the tower with the statue lady. Music hall, they can just perform. Your bard will be happy about that and can gain some inspiration. I think we're about ready for the spire. So once they've done all that, they can jump into the spire. And I mean, the important thing here, there's the final boss fight. There's a bit where the players should know the names of all the wizards, but hopefully they can learn the names here rather than have to go back out to the dungeon and go through all the different towers. Either way, I would have it be just like a bonus. If your player's been keeping track and they've learned the names of the wizards when they say them and then open the door to get through. If they don't, then just deal some damage or something. I don't like the idea of spawning like an enemy each time that they, mess up and don't know the name or something. Just have it deal damage to them and as a bit of a consequence, I guess. It's a neat little dungeon designed to soften them up with some final fights. The main thing here, so you have to know the names of everybody, then you teleport higher up. You meet Veneranda, which is a helmed horror with a brain in the jar on top, which is a really, really fun idea for a NPC. As written, she can be a helpful ally. She basically is really the only one that has retained kind of her sense of self and cognitive awareness about what's going on in Ythryn. Even though she is just a brain in a jar, but still, this is a freaking cool idea. And she wants to restore Ythryn, and she thinks the best way to do that is to get the Staff of Power from the big boss, Irolithus, and approach the obelisk, and not really explaining how that's going to help Ythryn at all, but adamant that's going to be the case. If your players actually go along with that, that's how you end up with the epilogue where they go time travel back in time 2,000 years before this all happens. So technically, Veneranda is correct. That will save Ythryn, but it creates a crazy epilogue sequence or continuing adventure, which is way outside the scope of the campaign for DMs to deal with. It makes me nervous as hell. Or you could use this as a loyalist of Irolithus and a mini-boss. And you could use her either here as a mini-boss to soften the players up, or as an agent out in the field that can like roam around. And it's not particularly powerful. I mean, Helmed Horrors are okay, CR4, and then the Brain in the Jar I think is a CR3. So depending on where your players are, it's not like it's a huge powerful boss. You could use other Brain in the Jars, or what you could do if you were really scaling it up like I'm planning on doing, throw multiples together, like make all the Brain in the Jars have their Helmed Horrors, and now you've got some real interesting, giant army, not a giant army, but if you've got like 3 or 4 of these, that becomes a way bigger deal as either this force that you can have like patrolling around the streets as the last bit of, law and order from the top of the spire, even though obviously most of the city's gone to shit. Or you can, keep her here and have it be that she is, even though she's got this amazingly cool look and stat block and everything else, she just wants to see, Ythryn be restored. And the players could fight her anyway. That's certainly an option. Iorlathus himself is a demi-lich, which again is just cribbing too much from Tomb of Annihilation. It annoys the crap out of me, especially because we played Tomb. That I am very leaning towards replacing him with an Elder Brain stat block, which I realize is, I think, an Illithid thing, but it would fit really well here because the whole lore literally ties to them being able to extract their brains into the jar, do the Futurama thing, except it's a brain and not a head, and preserve themselves that way. And that would be another reason, instead of just going with the typical like undead lich thing, instead he's this giant elder brain who's housed in this great thing like a mother brain style situation, and that way he can kind of control the city and definitely come up with some way where if you're gonna use him, have him be a presence in this final chapter. Otherwise, it's gonna feel almost random when you approach in here and you finally only recently start learning about Iorlathus and the fact that maybe he's still around and things like that. It's just like, oh, I guess we got to beat up this like demi-lich because he's not really a presence. Same thing with like Serac and Tomb of Annihilation, although it's even worse in Tomb where he just kind of shows up at the end because that one already had a decent boss fight. So think about if you're going to use him throughout the the final city. I know video games do a good job of this by just having blasting audio logs at you through the PA system or whatever. If they have something like that for Ythryn, then go with that. Make something up to where he can still either talk to the players, be aware of them, or if not, then he's still just broadcasting things as if he's, insane, but you can still hear that. Make him a presence, make him give proclamations, have him be either insane or make him aware of the players and talking with them. Or if there's if you want to go with the whole Far Realm thing, make it so maybe he's the ally your players need. He's like, oh, thank goodness some help has arrived to help shut down these interdimensional rifts that are happening around our city and letting all these nasty creatures crawl forth and, come to the tower and we can discuss things. You could really go nuts with it, but make it, even if he's just going to be a combat boss fight, make him more of a presence in the story, because I think you'd be doing a disservice to your players if they just kind of show up and beat him up. And to expound on that, you should also be using those the other factions that can show up in Ythryn, namely the Knights of the Black Sword, which is Avarice's crew, which can have a really good, fun rivalry with Valen. And I think about how fun it is when, and Uncharted does this too, there's always an enemy force that of course makes it there. They've either captured the good guy, Nazis capturing Indiana Jones and brought them to the thing, or they're hot on their heels, or the good guys are chasing the bad guys. There's some other big faction out there. So I like the idea of making her forces a lot larger than the players, not necessarily individually stronger, but just larger than the players. And that would also be very handy if they make it in there and they start getting killed, then they can either be turned into, aberrations for Ythryn, or if the Frostmaiden shows up for a final throwdown, depending on what you've done with her, hopefully she hasn't been, destroyed. You can have her show up, and it even mentions the fact that she will, like, for example, transform any of Avarice's forces into Cold Light Walkers and just add to her forces. So use these different factions in the city to create a more, living, dynamic area. Not right off the bat, let your players explore a little bit and get a foothold, and realize that, it's only, I think, about 500 feet across. So, in theory, your players, it's not that big. It's pretty small. It's not like this huge, like, giant city. It's more like a couple, city blocks or something. So you should be able to look down and maybe even see things happening in the distance. See these forces going around. It can be a headache for a DM to keep track of, for sure. But creating a more dynamic city with different factions going on should make it a lot more fun. And hopefully your players are willing to play ball with some of these factions, and you can have fun with it rather than just having them all be, combat encounter after combat encounter. And then we get to the epilogue, which can change a lot depending on what options you've given your players. So if you used Veneranda as a helpful NPC, then perhaps they've gone with the Year of Chilled Morrow epilogue, which is they've taken a Staff of Power from the big boss, and they've activated the obelisk in Ythryn, which is an interesting thing about how the obelisk is actually tied into all the other obelisks in some of the campaigns, including that one in Tomb of Annihilation. And it moves everybody back in time. You're transported back in time 2,000 some years to when Ythryn is still a city flying along. They haven't found the stone spindle, which, frustrating, there's no information on the stone spindle other than it caused a huge disruption that turned off the Mythalar and caused the city to crash. And it is well outside the scope of the adventure. Like, that is an ending. That is not a beginning. I mean, if you want to use that as a beginning, then go nuts. But that is basically a stinger ending to this whole thing. Is you do that, you tip the staff in there, you all hold your breath, the screen goes dark, credits roll, and then during the credit sequence, you see like this whole back in time thing happen. And I think that could be an interesting ending. I don't know if I'd want to continue playing that way, because what do you do at that point? Like, you're just in a city with all these high level, advanced civilization. The whole world has gone 2,000 years back. It's crazy. It's interesting, but it's crazy. Option number 2, of course, is just you beat everything and it's just normal. Like, you've defeated the Frostmaiden or done her bidding, which is something I'm thinking about, leaning towards. You've sealed up all the badness from Ythryn. You've cleared it out to where nothing bad is going to happen in there. Maybe you've been able to destroy the Mythalar or get it out of there. That would be an interesting thing. It's if maybe it could come down to where the Frostmaiden demands that you hand over the Mythalar or something after everything's been cleared out, and that's when you get to a final showdown. But either way, you've cleared everything out, and she has been defeated or mollified or agreed to, whatever, and daytime comes back to Icewind Dale. That's kind of the good ending, I guess. And you get a really crazy one, which is, I'm not sure if it's actually detailed in here, but in my opinion, it would be if you give players the Scroll of Tarask Summoning, which is a thing you can find in this dungeon. And literally, it will summon a Tarask. And, oh, there it is, summoning the Tarask. And that's obviously an insane thing that can happen. It's one of those things where if you give your players a Scroll of Tarask Summoning, they're going to use it. You just have to assume that they're going to use it. So you have to have a plan. So it's up to you if you provide your players with such an item. I think it would be very cool, but it also, and maybe that's how you interject a tier 4 finale into this suddenly is, and maybe you can use it as a nuclear option. Maybe, especially if you want to use the Far Realm thing about, the Mythalar's cracking and it's letting in all these Eldritch hordes, you're like, fuck it, I'm just summoning the Tarask, and this thing just smashes its way up. Maybe it wakes up from deep beneath the glacier, already destroys, Ythryn, obviously the Caves of Hunger destroyed, and it just crashes up there. I mean, it's just a Godzilla-size creature, and with an incredible stat block. One of the, I believe, still the strongest. I think it's a CR 30. And it just rampages towards 10 Towns, which is probably already reeling after the Shardolin Dragon. So 10 Towns, you're having a bad couple of weeks or whatever, how long it's been. But that could be this one, I can at least see a way out of it rather than the time travel one. This one equals a really incredibly crazy finale where if you want to end it there with, but I think they probably want to keep playing and try to now take out, hopefully they've done it in such a way where the Tarask solves their problem, and I would absolutely do that. But then the Tarask just creates another problem for them as it marches towards 10 Towns. It does mention, I believe, in the text that, eventually it would probably slow down because of the snow and ice and maybe go back into hibernation, but not before probably destroying like every single person in 10 Towns. So if you want to be able to survive any of that, you'll have to be able to stop this creature. And how to do that, I don't know. Maybe the Mythalar survives, your players can hop onto a little disc and have this kind of flying little airship that can attack the Tarask with. I don't know, it gets real nuts. It could be a really fun epilogue sequence, but just be aware, if you're going to give your players a Scroll of Tarask Summoning, they're gonna summon a Tarask. It's gonna happen. And I think that brings an end to all of my thoughts and feelings and criticisms and advice for Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, for Chapter 7, Doom of Ythryn, as well as the entire campaign. I hope that you found these videos useful or at least entertaining. I know I've found them helpful just for me being able to talk about all of this, and this is exactly what my crafting live streamed series is going to be like, although I will be able to talk to all of you directly, which will be a lot of fun. Look forward to doing that in a couple of weeks, and then we will lead up to our full live streamed campaign for Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I hope to see you all watching us for that. Otherwise, take care.